In the serene, sprawling estate of billionaire Jack Thompson, the world seemed as polished and perfect as the horses he bred. Jack was a man of few words, preferring the company of his prized racehorses to the bustling crowds of high society. Among all the horses he owned, Sapphire stood out. A striking thoroughbred with a coat like midnight velvet and a spirit as fierce as the wind, she was more than just a horse to Jack. She was a symbol of his success, the embodiment of his hard work and ambition. Jack had purchased Sapphire when she was only a foal, and over the years, she had blossomed into a world-class show horse, winning accolades and admiration at every competition. Their bond went beyond owner and animal. Sapphire was Jack's companion, his constant source of pride in a life that often felt devoid of deeper connections. Every morning, he would visit her stable, brushing her glossy coat and speaking softly to her, as if seeking the solace only she could provide. But one fateful day, a simple mistake changed everything. Due to a mix-up by his new assistant, Sapphire was mistakenly sent to a different farm, one far from Jack's lavish estate. The farm she was delivered to was small, struggling, and entirely outside the world Jack knew. What Jack didn't know was that this mistake would lead to an unexpected, life-changing journey for both him and Sapphire. Neither Jack nor the small, humble farm's owner, Maggie, could have anticipated how this mix-up would unfold. But one thing was certain: it would change their lives in ways they could never have imagined. Far from the polished estate of Jack Thompson lay a small, unassuming farm nestled in the rolling hills of the countryside. The air was fresher here, the earth richer, and the pace of life far slower. This was Maggie's world, a world where time moved not in the sharp tick-tock of watches but in the gentle rhythm of seasons, crops, and livestock. Maggie had inherited the farm from her father, a stubborn and hard-working man who had built the place from the ground up. Though she loved the land, life had been hard since he passed away. The farm was struggling to stay afloat, with bills piling up faster than the harvests could grow. She spent most of her days tending to the animals, fixing fences, and patching up barns that had seen better days. There was never enough money, never enough time, and sometimes not enough hope. So when a delivery truck arrived one crisp autumn morning, Maggie was surprised to see it wasn't the usual feed or equipment she had ordered. Instead, the driver stepped down from his truck, a nervous look in his eyes, and led her to the back. There, standing gracefully on the grass, was a horse, a majestic creature with a coat as deep as the midnight sky and eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies in their depths. Sapphire. Maggie's heart skipped a beat. She had heard of this horse, the rumors of the champion thoroughbred, the one who had won countless awards at prestigious competitions. What was she doing here? The driver handed her a set of papers, but Maggie, still in shock, barely skimmed them. It all seemed a bit too surreal to believe. "Where should I put her?" the driver asked, noticing Maggie's confusion. Maggie blinked, her mind racing. She could hardly believe the sight in front of her. A champion horse, delivered to her humble farm? Was this some mistake? She couldn't afford a horse like this, not in 1,000 lifetimes. But it was there, standing before her with grace, as though it belonged to the earth itself. In the stable, I guess," Maggie said, her voice shaky. As the driver unloaded Sapphire, Maggie's mind whirled. Who had sent this horse? Why was she here? A mistake, surely. But before she could ask any further questions, the truck sped off, disappearing down the narrow dirt road, leaving Maggie standing in the stable, staring at the magnificent creature before her. Over the next few days, Maggie discovered just how special Sapphire truly was. At first, she had no idea how to care for a horse of such caliber. But as she led Sapphire to the paddock and watched her graze peacefully under the wide open sky, something clicked. She could see the power in Sapphire's movements, the elegance in her gait, but there was also a quiet sadness in the way Sapphire stood. This was not the life a world-class horse deserved. Maggie found herself drawn to the horse in ways she hadn't expected. She brushed her sleek coat, fed her fresh hay, and talked to her about everything and nothing. Slowly, Sapphire warmed to Maggie's presence. Her once lonely heart began to heal, and though her farm still teetered on the brink of collapse, there was something magical about having Sapphire around. Maggie knew that this horse could change everything for her, even if she didn't fully understand why she'd been chosen to care for her. It wasn't just about the horse, it was the hope Sapphire brought into Maggie's life, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, unexpected things could happen. Maybe, just maybe, this horse had been sent to the wrong farm for a reason. And Maggie couldn't help but think that, perhaps, fate had more in store for her than she ever imagined. The vast, marble halls of Thompson Estate were unusually quiet that afternoon. Jack Thompson sat in his office, flipping through a series of papers related to his latest business venture. His mind, however, kept wandering back to Sapphire. She had been missing for several days now, and despite assurances from his staff, Jack couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. He decided to visit her breeding farm, a pristine facility located on the edge of his estate, where Sapphire had been scheduled for a routine checkup. But when he arrived, the facility was empty, and Sapphire was nowhere to be found. "Where is she?" Jack demanded, his voice sharp, as he stood in the middle of the barn. The assistant, a young intern named Emily, looked up from a clipboard, her face paling. "Sir, there seems to have been an error in the transport paperwork. She was sent to another location." Jack felt the floor beneath him slip. "What do you mean, another location?" he asked, struggling to maintain his composure. "Her transport was accidentally redirected to another farm. We're trying to track her down now." Jack's chest tightened. Another farm. The thought seemed absurd. Sapphire was a champion, a horse of unparalleled pedigree. She was worth more than most people's entire estates. How could something like this happen? "Where?" Jack demanded again, his voice colder than he intended. The assistant quickly checked the papers and handed him the address, an unfamiliar farm several hours away from the estate. Jack's heart sank as he read the name on the paper, Maggie's Farm. It was a place he had never heard of, a small operation that had nothing to do with his world of wealth and luxury. Without a second thought, Jack's anger flared. How could they let this happen? He immediately ordered his staff to organize transportation and prepare for an urgent trip. He would retrieve Sapphire himself and make sure the mistake was corrected. But as the car sped down the winding roads toward the farm, something within Jack began to shift. He couldn't explain it, but a vague sense of unease began to settle in his stomach. What if Sapphire had found something there? A different kind of care, a different kind of love, one that didn't come with the cold, calculating precision of a luxury estate. Jack clenched his jaw, determined to bring her back, but deep down, he couldn't help but wonder if this mix-up was more than just a simple mistake. What if, in the chaos of his perfect world, something far more valuable had been lost? As the days passed, the initial shock of Sapphire's arrival began to fade into a quiet routine. Maggie, still uncertain about how this stunning creature had ended up on her farm, slowly started to bond with the horse. Every morning, she would walk to the stable, her boots crunching against the gravel as she prepared Sapphire's feed. Despite the farm's challenges, the sight of Sapphire, regally grazing in the paddock or trotting gracefully across the field, gave Maggie a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. But the peace didn't last long. Maggie's farm, once filled with the sounds of cattle and clucking chickens, now felt too small for Sapphire's elegance and strength. The barn creaked under its own weight, and the fencing was no match for the powerful horse's energy. Maggie could feel the pressure mounting. She wasn't prepared for a horse of Sapphire's caliber. She didn't have the facilities, the training, or the experience to handle such a creature. And yet, there was no denying the bond that had started to form between them. Maggie's hands were rough from years of hard labor, but she treated Sapphire with an unexpected gentleness, brushing her coat, feeding her the best oats she could afford, and speaking to her like an old friend. The horse responded to her warmth, following Maggie's every movement with trust, as if understanding the quiet, unspoken promise that she would be cared for, no matter the cost. But the reality of the situation weighed heavily on Maggie's shoulders. The farm was struggling financially, barely keeping afloat despite her tireless efforts. The bank had been on her case for months, threatening foreclosure if she couldn't pay off her debts. Maggie had scraped by with small jobs, selling what little produce she had, and relying on the few local customers who still remembered her father's legacy. But Sapphire, magnificent as she was, seemed like a luxury Maggie couldn't afford. One day, as Maggie was cleaning the paddock, a car pulled into the driveway. A well-dressed man stepped out, his eyes immediately landing on Sapphire in the field. "That's the one," he said, his voice tinged with awe. "She's perfect." Maggie froze, her heart skipping a beat. The man was from a nearby equestrian stable, and he had come with an offer. Sapphire was worth a fortune, and he wanted to buy her. The price he offered was enough to clear every debt Maggie had ever accumulated, to pay for all the repairs the farm desperately needed, and still leave her with more than she had ever dreamed of. It was an offer she couldn't possibly ignore. But as the man spoke, Maggie felt a strange tightening in her chest. Sapphire wasn't just a horse to her, she had become something more. In the short time they had spent together, Sapphire had given Maggie a glimpse of hope, a connection to something larger than herself. Selling her would mean losing that hope, losing the one bright spot in an otherwise dark existence. Maggie thought of her father, of all the sacrifices he had made to keep the farm alive. Would he have sold Sapphire? Would he have chosen money over the animal he had always believed in? She couldn't be sure, but she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't bear to part with Sapphire. Torn between survival and attachment, Maggie was faced with an impossible decision. She needed the money, but the idea of selling Sapphire felt like a betrayal. The thought of letting go of the one thing that had brought her solace in the chaos of her life left her feeling hollow. Maggie stood there for a long moment, watching the man's eager eyes and imagining what might happen if she accepted his offer. But in the pit of her stomach, something told her that Sapphire was meant for more than just financial gain. This horse, with her fiery spirit and unspoken grace, had already begun to change Maggie's life. Would it be right to let her go? The question lingered in the air like a heavy storm cloud, and Maggie knew she had only a short time to decide. Jack's journey to Maggie's farm was one of growing impatience and unease. The distance from his estate to the small countryside farm seemed to stretch endlessly, and the longer the drive, the more his frustration mounted. How could this have happened? How could Sapphire, his prized, beloved horse, end up in the hands of someone so far removed from his world? It didn't make sense. The farther he traveled, the more the landscape changed. The towering glass buildings, the neatly manicured lawns, and the bright city lights of his world faded behind him. The scenery became more rugged and untamed, a stark contrast to the perfection Jack was used to. It was as if he were entering a completely different world, a world where money didn't hold sway, and everything moved at a slower, steadier pace. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the car pulled up to a humble dirt driveway, lined with wooden fences that were weathered but sturdy. The barn in the distance seemed small but solid, the fields around it open and wild, untouched by the manicured precision of Jack's own estate. It was beautiful in its simplicity. When Jack stepped out of the car, the cool breeze hit his face, carrying with it the scent of earth and hay, so different from the sterile air-conditioned rooms he was accustomed to. He adjusted his suit jacket, his face hard and determined. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he certainly didn't expect the emotional jolt that came when his eyes first landed on Sapphire. She stood in the far paddock, her dark coat gleaming in the sunlight, her powerful frame standing tall and proud. For a moment, Jack's heart caught in his throat. He had seen her in countless competitions, admired her from the comfort of his estate, but this was different. This was real. She looked so at home, so natural in this setting that Jack almost felt like an intruder. As he walked toward the paddock, a figure appeared from the barn. It was Maggie, her face framed by the sunlight, her hair wild from a day's work. She was holding the reins to Sapphire, her touch gentle but firm, as though she had known the horse her entire life. Jack stopped in his tracks, his irritation mixing with something else, something unspoken. He couldn't deny the care Maggie had shown Sapphire. There was no mistaking it. But the thought that this woman, this stranger, had taken better care of his horse than he had, was a bitter pill to swallow. Maggie glanced up and saw Jack standing there, his gaze intense. She didn't smile or offer pleasantries. Instead, she simply walked toward him, her expression calm but wary. "You're here for her," Maggie said quietly, her voice steady. Jack nodded, though a part of him wasn't sure if he was prepared for what was to come next. The air between Jack and Maggie hung heavy with unspoken words as they stood in the paddock, the world around them quiet except for the distant sound of wind rustling through the trees. Sapphire stood nearby, grazing contentedly, unaware of the tension that had settled like a weight in the space between the two of them. Jack's eyes kept drifting to the horse, his mind racing. He had come here with one goal, to bring Sapphire back. But now, standing on Maggie's farm, he wasn't so sure. The small, weathered barn, the wild, untamed fields, it was a far cry from the pristine, controlled world Jack knew. But the more he watched Maggie with Sapphire, the more he saw the connection between them, the way Maggie spoke to her softly, the way Sapphire responded to her gentle touch, as though they were two halves of the same soul. Maggie was not just taking care of Sapphire. She was loving her, in a way Jack realized he hadn't been able to. There was no amount of money, no amount of grandeur that could replace the kind of care and attention that Maggie gave, simply because she loved the horse for who she was. Maggie looked at Jack, her eyes soft but firm, as if she knew what was coming. "She's not just a horse to me, you know," she said quietly. "She's everything. She's been my lifeline." Jack swallowed hard, a lump rising in his throat. He had always viewed Sapphire as a symbol of his success, a trophy of his achievements. But for Maggie, Sapphire was something more. She was hope, love, and perhaps the very thing that kept her going. "I understand," Jack said after a long pause, his voice tight with emotion. He looked down at his feet, struggling with the weight of his decision. "But she's mine," he continued, his voice faltering. "I've spent years building my life around her, and I've never thought about what she might need, outside of my world." Maggie took a slow breath, her gaze never leaving Jack's. "She's found something here, Jack. Something you can't give her." She paused, and for the first time, a soft smile crossed her lips. "She belongs with me now, and I'll do everything I can to make sure she has the life she deserves." Jack nodded slowly, the finality of Maggie's words sinking in. He could feel a deep, bittersweet pang in his chest. But he knew she was right. Sapphire was not just a prize to be won. She was a living, breathing creature with needs and desires all her own. With a heavy heart, Jack stepped forward, reaching out to gently stroke Sapphire's mane. His hand lingered there for a moment longer than necessary. He could feel her warmth, her strength, and for the first time, he didn't want to take that away from her. "I'll help you," Jack said, his voice quieter now, filled with something deeper than just regret. "I'll make sure you have everything you need to keep this farm going. But she stays here." Maggie looked at him, her eyes softening. "Thank you," she whispered. And as Jack turned to leave, he looked back one last time. Sapphire's dark eyes met his, and for a brief moment there was an unspoken understanding between them, a farewell that neither of them would ever forget. Months passed, and Maggie's farm slowly began to thrive. With Jack's financial support, she was able to expand the property, fix the barns, and even build a proper training arena for Sapphire. The local community, inspired by the transformation, rallied behind her. Word of Sapphire's success in competition spread, and soon, Maggie's farm became known as a place where champions were born, not just in horses but in the strength of human resilience. Jack, on the other hand, found his life taking an unexpected turn. Though he never tried to reclaim Sapphire, his visits to the farm became more frequent. What began as a business transaction grew into a friendship, one based on mutual respect for the bond Maggie shared with the horse he had once owned. Jack learned to appreciate the simpler things in life: connection, loyalty, and the power of genuine care. As for Sapphire, she became the heart of Maggie's farm. The horse that had once symbolized Jack's success now represented something more, a testament to the unexpected paths life could take and the healing power of love. Jack often thought back to the day he let her go. He realized that sometimes the greatest gift you can give is the freedom to thrive, whether for a horse or for yourself.